empathy is really the most fun about MVC. It's the most powerful part of MVC. It's the thing that causes a tremendous amount of healing when it's done appropriately. It is the process that brings two people together when there's conflict. There's so much to be said for it. It's just really, really, really wonderful. So that's what we're going to talk about today, the power of ethically connecting with other people. One of the most wonderful things about empathy is that it doesn't really require that you provide a great deal of output. It actually is just the opposite. What it requires is your presence, to just be present to another person. It's like we empty our mind and we listen with our whole being. Sometimes I like to show a diagram of the Chinese characters. Chinese words are generally written by combining a number of symbols together. And the combined symbols for the word empathy have a picture of the ear, a picture of the heart, and a picture of everything. It's a symbol for everything. So it's like complete attention with the whole being, listening not just with your ears, but also with your heart. Really listening to what's going on with another person. Marshall Rosenberg likes to say about empathy is that what you're doing is you're going with a divine flow. To give more clarity to that is that when you're in an empathic situation and you're giving empathy to someone is really speaking, you'll notice that their conversation might tend to hop around from one place to another. You might start out talking about a specific topic, and then pretty soon they're really talking about something else. And you're following along with that, and if you were following with your rational mind and try to take notes on the words that they're saying, you might notice that, whoa, suddenly now they're really talking about some entirely different sort of thing. And what they're doing is they're taking this empathic pathway to the depth of their being, because someone is there listening to them. Someone is there giving of their presence, and they're able to just explore their life experience. And oftentimes when we are triggered by something that somebody does, triggers a certain response in us, and then the reason that that response was triggered in us really has to do with something different than what actually happened, and then even that might have something to do with something different than what happened then. So there's this kind of hopping around our consciousness and our memories and where our experiences are stored, and it's an unfolding of what's really alive in us and what is at the root cause of what we're experiencing. So when we're giving empathy, we just want to focus on what's happening with that other person, with what they're talking. Oftentimes people will think that in order for someone to understand them, what they have to do is they have to make sure that they tell the story, and that in the telling of the story and who said what and what happened when, that's going to be the pathway to understanding. And if that's happening, then we really try to sort of tempt them away from the story and the past by guessing what they're feeling and what they're needing right now, because there's no healing in the past. There's no way to go back into the past and change what happened. So concentrating on the story is not going to be very helpful. And in particular, if the person that's there with, you're the person giving empathy and you were there at the story, it becomes even less useful because your experience of the story is going to be different than the other person's experience of the story. What is important is what's alive in the person right now. So what do we do when we're giving empathy? Well, besides being present and really listening, we're listening not so much to the words the person is saying, but we're listening to the feelings and the needs that they have. And we're just there. We're just translating everything that they say into our connection with what we are experiencing as their feelings and their needs. And if they're saying things like, well, I felt really anxious because I had a need for some confidence and some clarity about what was going on, then there's nothing for us to do except just really be there with them, experiencing anxiety and the need for connection and for clarity. But if they're involved in the story and they're not really expressing what their feelings and their needs are, then we can make a guess. So, gosh, I'm guessing that you were feeling really anxious because you really wanted to have some clarity about what was going on. And then that helps them connect to their feelings and their needs. However, if they're already connected to their feelings and needs, then all we can offer that's helpful is to just be present for them, to just be there. So we offer your verbal reflections to confirm what we're experiencing, and sometimes to create a greater sense of connection, especially if someone's really triggered. And I was so furious, and yeah, I can see how furious you were, just to make sure they know that we've heard them. And then, when do we know empathy is over? And empathy generally tends to be over when the person who's speaking has what we call a post-empathic shift. Something happens that their posture might change, their tone of voice or the pace that they're speaking at might change. They might even just stop talking. And that is an indicator to us has received the empathy and that our process is kind of complete. And then sometimes after their process is complete, they might ask for some advice or what our experience was, or if we've ever experienced anything like that. And then, if they're willing to have their attorney sign a document saying that they promise not to sue you after you give them your advice or your story, then you can go ahead and share with them. That's supposed to be funny, but I don't think I handled it very well. So I'd like to share with you now some notes that I took from a talk that Marshall Rosenberg gave in October of 2003. He talked about how empathy is not mental. It's not an intellectual understanding, and any attempt to make it an intellectual understanding will actually block the empathy. It's helpful to think of it as if you were riding a surfboard. It's where you're finding the energy in a person and you're riding that energy. We give up expectations and projections and comparisons and analysis. We try to empty our mind and just listen to this person with our whole being. And Marshall quoted a well-known philosopher and teacher, "When two or more are gathered in my name, there I am." He said that when two people are really connected in this divine energy, that is empathy, that it is connecting with the divine energy of life. Martin Buber, that was Jesus Christ, and another great teacher, Martin Buber, says, "Our full presence is the greatest gift that one can give." Other things that can really help us when we're giving empathy is to forget everything we know about another person, because any understanding that we have of a person will block the flow of what this person is expressing. Knowing blocks the energy. So we try to bring nothing of the past. The present moment, it's a unique and sacred event. And the more that we talk about the past, the less healing there is. We also want to be careful not to hear what another person thinks and to not get caught up in the words that they're saying, but to only hear what they're observing, what they're feeling, what they're needing, and what they're requesting. It's a constant translation in many cases, because what we want to do is attend to the divine energy that comes from a person by connecting to the feelings and the needs that that person is experiencing, whether they're aware of it or not. It really helps to remember that their words are a crude map of what's going on with them, and we're looking for the territory. Oftentimes when you're involved in giving empathy, you're tempted to try to lead a person to a certain place. You know that if they could just see this and that, then they'd really understand. But we try not to do that at all. And it can be a challenge if you're somebody like me. What we really want to do is to just reflect judgment into an expression of need. We want to translate what they're saying, not lead them. And for our own part, we want to try to avoid being right. Trying to be right. It's like being an NVC parrot. The more you rely on your connection to the person and your presence to them, the greater the empathy was going to be. Sometimes people will be telling a story. And so if they are, then we want to try to jump to what's alive about that story right now. So when you recall that story, I'm guessing that you're feeling because you're needing would be a phrase that we might try to use. When you're giving empathy with people, sometimes you will notice that you have your own feelings come up. And when that happens, then you've kind of lost connection with the other person. So the first thing that we try to do there is give emergency first aid empathy to ourselves by just connecting to what the need is that's alive and this feeling that's rushing through us, and then returning our presence to the other person. However, sometimes we're so overwhelmed that we can't, and in which case you might want to ask for a break so that you can deal with your issues before you go on. You might get empathy from this other person. You might just take a little time out for yourself. But most often when you just, when you have a reaction and you just take a millisecond or so to recognize that you're having a sympathetic reaction and to recognize what your need is that's causing this reaction, you can let it go and you can return to the person pretty easily. And if not, just ask for a break. So the only two reasons to say anything is to confirm what you're hearing and to help another person know that they are heard. So what you're confirming that you're hearing is what the feelings and needs are, not the details of the story that they might be telling. We also know that reflecting back messages that are emotionally charged can really be helpful to a person. When they're really charged and they say something, it can be very helpful for them to hear back from you that what they have said, what they're experiencing. And you only need to paraphrase when it contributes to greater understanding and greater compassion. So why do we do this? We do this because staying with empathy really allows a person who's speaking to touch deeper levels of themselves. That's the power of it. Oh, here's my joke, by the way. Always after an empathic connection, people will want a post-empathic request. If they say, "Tell me what to do," Marshall responds, "Only if you do it without question and you don't complain when it ruins your life." So I also want to share with you what empathy is not. When I teach my classes in the advanced class, I will have people put it into teams of 3, and they each take turns receiving empathy, giving empathy, and watching, and then switches, and everybody gets a chance to do each of those things. And then I walk around the room and listen to what they're doing, and it's very interesting how often I hear people do things that empathy is not. So I would just like to share with you a list of things that empathy is not, so that you can begin to notice if you're doing this. There are things that we have been taught in the past that are really helpful for people. So many of us have been trained to do these things. However, I would encourage you to discover the joy that you experience when you can refrain from doing these things and just be present with the other person. So empathy is not fixing it, not saying things like, "Well, what will help is," and it's not advising, it's not telling people what you think you should do. It's not interrogating, "Well, how did that happen? When did this start? Has this happened often?" We'll try to avoid any of that. Explaining to people, oh yeah, well, she really was trying to say. We don't want to try to explain to people. We don't want to correct them. "Oh, I was there, and that's not how it was. This does not." We don't want to educate them to tell them that they can learn from it. We don't want to do that. We don't want to shut them down. "Oh, it's not important. Don't worry about it. Be strong. Man up," as they would say today. We don't want to console people. "Oh, that wasn't your fault. Everybody does that." We don't want to commiserate. "How could he do that? We don't want to one-up people. "Well, you should hear about the time." Or "I remember when." Tell our own tale. We don't want to evaluate people. If you hadn't been so sensitive, then we don't want to sympathize with people. "Oh, poor thing." And we don't want to take blame. "Sorry, I should have." And we don't want to try to explain our part of the story. So all of those kinds of things will tend to block the flow of empathy. And avoiding blocking the flow of empathy is golden. It's so wonderful when you can help somebody and help yourself and experience that most engaging process of sharing somebody's experience of life. So that kind of completes my process of describing what I have to say about empathy.